Well, hello. We're absolutely delighted to welcome you to what is the first session of this ISCN 2022. We've got a great panel for you, and we're going to be talking about, I think, something that's exercising all of us, which is how do we position sustainability as a real manifesto for change? And the second part of our discussion is to talk about third way people, and we'll unpack that term for you a little bit. So really what this session does is it draws on a book that we've been busy putting together over the last year or so. It's coming out through Bloomsbury Press in February of next year. And so what we've done for this session is to invite some of the authors of the 24 chapters that's looking at really positioning sustainability in higher education as an agenda for transformational change. So what this session is doing is selecting some of those chapters and taking different slices into that agenda, really thinking about how is it that we are positioning sustainability as that kind of fuel for transformational change. I've stopped saying catalyst in many ways, just because we become changed too. So really the position is that universities and higher education really are essential to kind of fuel this transformation of higher education and really deliver to our fullest capacity against the SDGs and sustainable development more broadly. So we spent a lot of time working with an incredible cadre of international authors, 65 of them, 30 different universities and higher education institutions, 24 chapters, 16 different countries, and many of them drawing on examples much more broadly than that, and actually millions and millions of students. And the sense of students as a real innovation catalyst is just incredible in this book, so please look out for it. We divided the book into two parts. So the first part really looks at how is it that sustainability can be adopted as a driver of change within the institution. So thinking about how universities and colleges are really reacting and responding to the different influencing factors outside the academy. So that's the kind of first part. There's about 11 chapters in part one. And then the second part of the book, we've pulled the other 13 chapters together to think about how is it that universities, when they are engaging in this agenda, how is it they are influencing and affecting change and actually amplifying their impact beyond the institution, that sense of working with others, the sense of radical collaboration, partnership working. So two parts of that, how we as institutions become changed by engagement and how we then go on to influence and be part of the change with others. I had the daunting prospect of starting with a blank page that said at the top conclusions, to try and curate a suite of messages from those 24 chapters. And we did so in articulating, I think, a kind of manifesto for change. And I just want to spend a moment of this because we're going to see this illustrated, I think, beautifully by our panelists. There is a very real set of evidence now that context and place really matter. Each institution is really arriving at their engagement with this agenda through their own sense of heritage as an institution, the mission of the institution, and the opportunities and challenges in the place and places that they operate. So that really comes through incredibly strongly. That sense of mission really matters. I think we're all really clear that sustainability isn't something you add on to everything else that an institution is doing. It's very much mainstreamed through what the institution's doing. So I talk about teaching, learning, research, innovation, civic and community engagement, and then sustainability. No, sustainability really is the kind of goggles, as I put it, that you look at to realize and reimagine your mission. having leadership at every level really does matter, and having a strategy that's not just a strategy, but one that's actually enacted is really important. And critically, students, that energy, that sense of foresight, that sense of responsibility they feel to the now and to the future, harnessing that in a myriad of different ways is such a powerful agenda for change. I think everyone is clear this is a marathon, not a sprint, and therefore the idea of having patience and resolve and the agility to rethink, re-engage, unlearn, really kind of keep going for what is a long agenda, but actually having that patience. People are spending a lot of time talking about this, communicating, building a sense of shared understanding, being inclusive across the institution and with partners. So really spending time to build community, build partnerships, invest in kind of relationship capital, building trust with others. I think the other thing that really comes across as well is the critical role of universities in terms of holding others to account, challenging this agenda, thinking about the things that are not stated within the SDGs, thinking about the things that need to be enacted. So our sense of being a critical kind of analyst and reflecting on the agenda and thinking about what needs to change is really important as well. What we found is small and large engagements in this, such that size does not matter. It's this sense of impact. And we've seen relatively small changes, maybe at a curriculum level within one institution, having powerful societal impacts in the communities that they serve. And we've also seen very large transformational whole institution spaces that change, and again having impact. And so I think there is a real sense that small and large opportunities are here for people. So doing something different in your classroom can be powerfully impactful to create an agenda for change, just as much sometimes as a whole strategic transformational agenda. And then finally, I think we all know this because we're here, but that higher education and universities really do matter in terms of how we show up. So let's unpack that a little bit by looking at our panel. I hope that David will be able to join us with any technical difficulties, but David wrote a compelling chapter about Nigerian universities and the achievement of the SDGs, really pointing out the challenges, the opportunities, and what needs to happen. It really is a manifesto for change for Nigerian universities. And I think many universities globally can learn so much from David's chapter. It's a very exciting chapter. So I hope you'll be able to join us today. Julie and Shana have really, I think, illustrated accelerating response to a changing climate solutions across scales, something that can be taken and kind of carved out in one institution, how that can be shaped and formed in another institution, and how we're really connecting across those scales. We're going to hear from Julie and Shana later. I put together a chapter which looks at leadership and governance and some insights there. Julio and colleagues from both UPM in Spain and Valencia put together an incredible chapter which illustrates with some wonderful examples of universities working with their cities to really scale and impact for delivery against that kind of transformation at the city level. And then Dave Gorman and his colleague Michelle Brown from University of Edinburgh really taking a deep dive into the kind of lessons that they've learned across their journey as an institution. So thinking about transformational change within that institutional context. So we're going to hear from all of them. They're going to give you a window into the kind of key insights from their chapter. And so this is our kind of premise, really, that we can play, I think, our fullest part in this agenda is really get this sense of universities engaging here can be a powerful part of a transformative change that we need to see. So I'm going to stop talking now and pass you over to Julie to take us on and give us some insights into her chapter with Shana. Julie, so it'd be great to hear from you. and then we'll move through with the rest of our panel. We will have lots of time, as Julie's just setting up to share her screen, we'll have lots of time to think about your questions. So please post your questions into the Q&A box. We'll get to as many of them as we can, and those that we don't manage to get to today, we'll try and sweep up in the blog for ISCN. So Julie.
Great, thank you so much, Wendy. And I just want to say it's so good to see all of you on the panel. I really miss, nobody will be surprised for the friends in the audience, but one of the things I really miss that for me has been taken away from COVID is actually ISCN in person, because for me it was, you know, I think what we all work so hard on these transformative issues. We have good days, we have challenging days, and it was coming together once a year in person and sharing those experiences across the globe. And just the amount of common ground we all found, regardless of where you sat in the world, was just tremendous, which I think has brought us together for over a decade. So I'm hoping this is really just a placeholder until we can all be together again. And Wendy, I just want to thank you for your vision. I've really been inspired by your work over the past couple of years. And ironically, I think we've even connected more due to COVID online, even though you're here in Boston. So just want to thank you for your vision and bringing this incredible group of people together. I know hopefully many of you, but I'm Julie Newman, the Director of Sustainability at MIT, and work closely with Shauna. Maybe just a quick introduction and we'll jump in, Shauna.
Sure, I'm Shauna Weber. I have had the pleasure of working with Julie for many years, and am really excited about this book and the thinking that Wendy is curating here. So, and I direct the Office of Sustainability at Princeton. Back to Julie.
Great, thanks. So in our couple of minutes, we just want to, you know, again, thank Wendy for the opportunity to write up our Scales of Impact framework. This didn't just come to us overnight. This is a framework that we're sharing with you today that both Shauna and I have been both applying to MIT in my case and to Princeton in her case respectively for many years, and really testing it out. We've been using it as a way. I built my whole platform at MIT on what we're sharing with you, and both of us really trying to evolve into this new way of being. And dealing and managing transformation in our institutions. So it's a true example of a living lab and test bed on our campuses. And I'd say where this chapter really became an opportunity was for us to really demonstrate how we're applying this to solving for zero emissions on our campuses. So I'm going to kick off. We have 3 premises that we want to emphasize in our short overview. I'm going to start off with premise 1. And then we'll pass it back to Shauna to get into 2 and 3, and I'll share a little bit. So just to begin with, the purpose of this chapter is to illustrate a conceptual framework for how higher education institutions can reposition to leverage the role of the campus in regenerative change across multiple scales. At the levels of the role of the individual, the campus, the city, the state, the country, again, the globe, if you will, and recognizing that that depending upon where you're from, you have different constructs of these geographical frameworks, provinces, and so on. To begin, we argue that working across scales, universities are able to demonstrate at the local scale and influence up to the global scale, connecting the academic mission to the broader place-based agenda and national and international agendas as they relate to sustainability and climate change. And it's recognized that many applied sustainability programs in higher education are organized to activate only individuals or operational scales on campus. And it's one of those challenges that many of us come across. But we believe, and we argue in this chapter, that that's actually quite a shortcoming for those campuses that are mired in just the individual operational. And so again, we don't have time to delve into that today, but we're happy to discuss that at a further time. But that is the underlying premise of our chapter and the work we've been doing. So the scale of the global crisis and its urgency calls for this immediate action and a coordinated systemic response that activates all of the scales strategically and concurrently. And so while not illustrated in our chapter, we also argue that the scaled influence approach presented in our chapter and presented to you today is applicable to sustainability related topics. And again, happy to follow up on that. And that many of our offices across you could apply this to waste management, supply chain, and so on. In our chapter, we actually set out to build a value proposition of the Scales of Impact framework as applied to universities to address climate change specifically. So I hope that's enticing enough to read our chapter when it comes out next February. That's our plug. But we also argue and demonstrate that climate solutions must be designed at each scale, keeping the interplay across the scales at the forefront of our thinking and planning. And so, as the example is, we're all challenged to build these zero emission buildings or zero emission campuses. And what we're questioning is, how much does that have to all take place on the campus, or what's the construct of what's happening in your city, in your state, at your grid level, in your country, to actually influence and understand and plan accordingly as we're looking at the decarbonization of our grids or the decarbonization of our municipalities. So, and given the apparent activation of systemic scales today, both in the US and globally, the timing is ideal for higher education to help strengthen these feedback loops among these scales. And we believe this is one of the most unique roles for higher education. And it's to infuse the global systems with the lessons learned from real-time testing of evidence-based research informed in these scalable solutions. So at this moment in history, there appears to be an unprecedented potential for alignment of climate action. And so again, this is the framework and the way it applies now. This is, 10 years ago when we were at an ISCN, if you had said, would this happen, I would have optimistically said, I hope so, but I'm not sure I've been able to predict that we would get there with a particular focus on our own country. But we've arrived where we have the role of the individual, right? So that's another part of our discussion, but an institution committed to a net zero. So assuming also global operations of offsets, if you will, to zero direct, to zero emissions by 2050, situated on our own place of net zero by 2050. Massachusetts also has a commitment to 2050 as well at the moment of the United States. We'll see where we stand on that over time, but at least globally being called for by the IPCC at 2050 as well. And so this alignment is enabling us to strategically think across these scales to inform and accelerate strategic priorities and successes over time. So I'm going to bump this over to Shauna to share how this applies and is emerging for Princeton, and then we'll stop sharing slides.
Thank you, Julie. Hello, everybody. So as Julie was saying, even 5 years ago, 10 years ago, there were gaps in this alignment. And so some of these spheres would be blank or question marks. So what we're really seeing right now globally is this potential for alignment, because there's enough momentum at each of these scales to really start to think about real activation. And so I think, these institutional commitments, and it doesn't even matter what your date is, but the fact that there is a commitment to net zero or decarbonization really drives change, and it starts to amplify the impact across these scales. And I've certainly seen that at my institution. And as Julie said, this is not a short-term, quick process. This is the marathon that Wendy was talking about, not a sprint. So this is years and years of building blocks at all these scales. We're activating at the campus scale, the individual and the campus scale, and using that as a catalyst for some of these other conversations. And of course, our faculty have global reach through their research networks. And so we're all global in different ways. So, but without that place-based and place-anchored goal setting, it becomes very difficult to engage across these scales of impact. So I can't emphasize enough how important these place-based commitments are, because what we're doing is we're solving for the global problems as they manifest locally. And that's the replicable model. Like, what is the local manifestation where I am, and how can we engage the community in problem solving for those? Because when we practice that, I've been thinking about this a lot lately. How do we set our universities and institutions up to be places where we can all practice the behaviors and the decision making that leads us, so that we're 10 years from now, we're looking at this whole framework in a different light. Maybe all the goals are sooner. So what are we doing today that helps us all practice, in particular our students, for that decision making, that moment 10 years from now, the same as today's moment reflects 10 years ago. So I'll stop there.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. Thank you, Shauna. And so premise 2, back to Shauna, is climate action through energy transition can be a suitable shared agenda around which university can convene stakeholders to accelerate progress towards climate targets such as net zero and zero direct emissions. I think you mostly commented on that, Shauna, but anything else you wanted to add on that front?
So I think the one thing I'll add to that is the stakeholder engagement part of it. I mean, all of us who do this work spend a lot of time building coalitions. And it's the building of coalitions that started 10 years ago that have led to institutional commitments today. Yeah. So I think our role globally in our field as coalition builders and trust builders cannot be underestimated in its impact as we run this marathon. And given that our chapter is focused on climate action as the place for us to anchor this conversation, but of course, as Julie said, this process could apply to any dimension of sustainability. But the comment I'll end on is the decision making that's happening today around infrastructure sets us up for either reaching our global targets or not reaching our global targets, because the decision makers who decide on what infrastructure is going to be renewed now, we're stuck with that infrastructure for decades. So to me, that's one of the most important tangible things that campuses can do, is demonstrate what it takes to make infrastructure conversions away from systems that rely on fossil fuels. It's one of the most important things we can do.
Great, thanks. And the third premise that we just want to emphasize to entice you to read our chapter in February is the university campuses can support major infrastructure projects, again, Shauna just emphasized this, at the city regional scale that both influence student learning and decision makers in the present, as well as said learning becoming amplified as students assume positions of leadership in these realms. And so I think one of the most important pieces here, I was writing some notes, Wendy, when you were speaking, and this notion of the sprint versus the marathon, because I think we are at a time where we've been on the long haul marathon, but actually I would argue we're also in the midst of facing some sprints. And one of those sprints is depending upon how active our cities are. And so based in Cambridge, Boston, for those of you, I believe, in San Francisco, Chicago, where these building energy use disclosure ordinances, I don't know what the equivalent is on the European front, but where cities are taking into their own hands to create very aggressive carbon strategies, carbon fines, if you will, providing a cost of carbon on our fossil fuel and buildings. There's going to be some sprints involved right now to try to determine that alignment within our own municipality. So if that's not something folks are following, luckily we've been following New York for a couple of years, and in our case now it's coming to Cambridge and Boston, but it's coming at a very rapid pace as to how do we plan for this zero emission future? What are the role in the short term of renewable energy certificates and carbon offsets? And the last piece I just want to add, this is really for Wendy's sake to kind of hook her. I think we're going to, as offices, need to start to prepare for new skill sets and competencies around managing our carbon future. And this is, I think our past skill set was how do we create greenhouse gas portfolios and be able to account for our emissions coming out of our institute. I think the forward thinking is how are we going to actually account for the impact and the reduction, not just measuring them in the same calculator, but actually creating carbon teams, if you will, that manifest in managing carbon across these scales. So we understand, for those of us who are positioned to have to use renewable energy certificates, offsets, count our carbon, where there's cost involved. I think this is going to be the future forward skill set and competency that we're going to have to start to prepare for. So that's a hook for you for your next our next edition, Wendy. And I think we're over time. So thank you, and look forward to the discussion.
Fantastic. That's just perfect. I mean, just the number of, not just the scales, but the way you're talking about the convening power, you know, that sense of the capital infrastructure, and a beautiful segue, I think, for us to talk to Julio now about cities. And so, Julio, I'd love to invite you in just to give us a, you know, as Shana and Julie have done, a sneak peek, if you wouldn't mind, on your chapter, talking to us really about universities and cities. So great opportunity to hear from you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Wendy. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you and congratulations for convening such an amazing panel. And I was thinking in previous conferences, right, how inspiring was the conferences at ICS, and I remember Siena and Vancouver, and I'm missing this so much. But listening to you, Wendy, and Julie and Sana, it's so inspiring. So I'm so grateful to be here, and well, looking forward to seeing in person again. But thanks also to this online conference, we can maybe it's easier for us to stay together from all around the globe, which is also a good opportunity to see other people. So thank you so much for inviting me, and let me share the screen. So as Wendy was saying, our chapter is focused on how universities can foster the transformation of cities across the globe, and with some examples from Spain, Europe, right? And it's, well, it's very related to what Julie was saying just at the end. And I want to start thinking a bit on what we need to do to transform a city, right? And I think we all know that to transform a city, and if we focus on this climate neutrality that Julie was saying at the end, talking about these zero emissions, right? We all know that with incremental approaches, nothing will really change. So we'll not achieve the objectives, right? We need a systemic transformation. We need to unlock exponential change, right? And to do that, what we have been doing in Europe for a couple of years is to develop a mission to transform our cities in Europe, which is based on the missions approach launched by Mariana Mazzucato. You probably have heard about it, which is based on the Apollo 11 mission that the US did like 50 years ago, or almost 60 years ago, right? When they launched the spacecraft to reach the moon, right? And to make this possible, this transformation in a systemic way, we need to act in a very different way. And this is like the four main characteristics that we need to do. We first need radical collaboration. So we will only change our system, our cities, if we work all together, if all the stakeholders are working together. And that's the convening power you were talking about, Wendy and Julie. I think it's why the universities, the higher education system can play a huge role here. So first, the radical collaboration. Second, alignment and connection of instruments, because that's like a spider net, right? So we cannot transform a city without a simultaneous set of projects working in a portfolio way. So connecting them and aligning to transform the city. Third, we need to place the citizens at the center of the transformation through much more than a citizen participation. So it's like a kind of citizen participation 2.0. It's a citizen engagement, having the citizens as real agents of change in the city. But we won't do that just with traditional waterfall approaches, right? We need agile approaches. We need to take risks. We need to experiment. And we all know how hard this is at the urban level in a public institution like a city council, right? So that's why I think the universities can play a huge role here, because we are able to foster these four aspects in a city. How? I think through the main three missions plus one additional. So through education, we can, instead of just training or teaching our students who will be in the university for some years. We can start training city officials and other local actors. We can train these change agents in the city. We can really implement transdisciplinary programs, and we can focus some of our subjects, or even if hopefully most of our programs, with a problem-based learning approach, and these problems related to cities, and creating awareness, because we have to, well, you were also, Wendy, talking about that. We now have more than 200 million students worldwide. So if we think about a process of 6 years as an average maybe of this education, we see that every 6 years we are teaching or educating 200 million people worldwide. So that's a huge opportunity to create awareness and to change our society. If we think about research, we can also align our research towards solving urban problems. So, for example, with some initiatives like the one that was launched in Vancouver, the City Studio, or launching urban programs that are related to research, we can also focus our social impact on transforming the cities, both transforming students' mindsets and improving people's lives in cities where universities are placed, because most of them are located in urban areas. But I think we can go a bit further. These are the 3 typical missions of a university, but I think we as universities can be this convening power. We can establish partnerships, or as you were saying, we can be coalition builders, right? We can orchestrate and facilitate a multi-stakeholder collaboration between all different stakeholders at the urban level, which is, I think the university is the only actor that can play this role, because it can build trust, it can have the legitimacy, it still has, the power to bring together the private sector, the city council, other governments, the civil society, and other researchers to the same table to create a holding environment to have these hard conversations that we need to deliver, to really transform our cities. But of course, we are facing lots of barriers, right? And we know that in terms of education, some programs are still too narrow in scope. If we think about research, incentives are really integrating interdisciplinary and multi-stakeholder collaboration. So it's hard to work on this because there is no reward for that. And there is lots of resistance to change, both at the individual level in faculty, sometimes students, staff, and also at the leadership teams in some occasions, right? So we have to overcome these barriers, but we have some examples that are showing that that's possible, right? And in particular, what we are showing in the book chapter, hope you will read it soon, are the examples of Madrid and Valencia, which are 2 Spanish cities. Madrid is the capital of Spain, and Valencia is a city in the coast, right? And they are both quite large cities. Madrid is 3.5 million people, and Valencia 0.8 million people, almost 1 million people. In the city, in the metropolitan area, both are much larger, right? And in both cases, the idea was this partnership between the city and the university, which drives the transformation of the city. In Madrid, what we are doing at Technical University of Madrid is placing the problem or locating the problem of the urban transformation at the center, and then working through 3 different pillars or with 3 different approaches. First, orchestrating different actors. Second, offering services to the city, and then experimenting, developing a portfolio of connected actions in the city to transform the urban area, right? And we can see here how this flash out in more detail. I won't go into the details because that's maybe very complicated. But in terms of orchestration, we as university are supporting the convening of many different stakeholders like private sector, civil society, and so forth. We are also helping the city council to establish and maintain a multidisciplinary, multi-departmental or interdepartmental group with people working from many different departments. So breaking down silos in the in the city. And well, that's the main idea of the orchestration. And when we talk about services, we are offering those services that are needed to overcome the barriers that are established in a city to really transform. So we are, for example, working on training, changing mindsets. We are creating new narratives. We are doing knowledge transfer, and we are working on communication. We are also providing people with the skills to make this happen, as Julie was saying also before. And in terms of the experimentation, we are deploying this portfolio of projects. There is now more than 20 projects in the city of Madrid, but the idea is to have hundreds of projects all connected and all working towards the city transformation. And the university can convene the stakeholders to work on these projects in a coherent and connected way, and not just implementing projects with a silo approach, working only on mobility, but combining all the areas of the city and then transforming the system through this like a spider web approach, right? And in Valencia, and that's the last slide, they are also doing a similar approach, merging the urban agenda with these missions in Europe. The mission I mentioned already have 100 cities in Europe that want to be climate neutral by 2030, and Valencia is one of them. So they are merging this mission with the urban agenda, and they are working on engaging all the different stakeholders. They are working on building political consensus that it's so this agenda is not an agenda of the current mayor, but it's a long-term agenda. They are working on governance model. They are breaking down silos. They are attracting the research and innovation activities towards the city transformation. And in the end of the day, what they are doing is working on this quintuple helix. So bringing together the public sector, the private sector, academia, mass media, and civil society to work together. And the university is playing a huge role also here as a convener of all this process. And for example, in Valencia, one thing that they have very interesting is they have ambassadors to be climate neutral. And you can be an ambassador as a person, but you can also be an ambassador as an organization. And for example, both the two universities that are in the city, they both committed to be climate neutral by 2030 in accordance with the mission. And that's a way, you know, to catalyze and to push this transformation forward. And that's the university, but there is also private companies. There is different organizations that are committed to be climate neutral by 2030 to support the effort of the city. So these two are examples of how cities can be transformed with the universities playing a huge role in the process. Thank you so much.
Yes, perfect. I mean, hopefully that has enticed you to want to read the whole chapter. But I see two things there. One is that kind of learning coalition, really, you know, it's kind of what we do, but we're kind of learning together, but also the amplification that's going on in terms of that engagement. So it's just a very powerful model. So 20, 100, 1,000 projects, it's incredible. But I think if you're looking at that kind of connection, that sense of building trust, relationship capital, trust capital, engaging with those that we serve, I'd love to bring Dave Gorman in, who with his colleague Michelle Brown wrote a chapter really just looking to think about how are we engaging with our community inside and with our community that we serve outside. So Dave, do you want to just take us on and just give us some insights from your chapter about lessons from the University of Edinburgh? So teach us.
Thank you, Wendy, and good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everybody. It's a great pleasure to join a panel like this. I want to echo what Julie was saying. I do miss the in-person. I can't wait to have some conversations over a glass of wine somewhere with some of you on the call. I want to offer my thanks to my former Deputy Director, Michelle Brown, who sadly moved on to other things, but before she left, she helped me write this book chapter. Again, I want to thank Wendy for all the insight she's given me down the years, and also the spur to write this chapter, because we realize that if this will sound a little pathetic, but even if nobody else reads the chapter, it's been really helpful for us to step back and reflect on what we've been doing. So that's what I'll try and do over the next 8 minutes or so, is just give you some flavor for what we try to do in our chapter. So for those who don't know me, I'm Dave Gorman. I'm Director for Social Responsibility and Sustainability at the university. I've been there since 2013, and for a long time, my deputy, Michelle Brown, was there as well from 2014. And I was the first Director for Social Responsibility and Sustainability at the university. So when I came in, there wasn't all that much that we had to build. We're now currently a team of 29, so that's pretty large. And we've accrued things as we go. Our remit is probably similar to many of you, but because our university has made a commitment to be socially responsible and sustainable and have a positive social impact, it's part of our role to figure out, well, what on earth does that mean in practice? So we do some horizon scanning for risks and opportunities. So you might be reading an article about how terrible it is that some people working in a prawn processing factory somewhere are having a terrible time. But our job would be to see whether we're buying those prawns, for example, whether we're exposed to risks. And then the obverse of that is opportunities. So I think the circular economy is a huge opportunity for lots of us. So we try to stimulate the university to do work there. And we do that across a reasonably wide range of topics. So we do climate change like everybody else. We've set a target to be net zero by 2040. We also think about what this means for our supply chain in terms of what we buy and human rights. We try, I'm Mr. Gorman, not Professor Gorman, but we try and influence our academic friends as to what they research and what do they teach. But we also advise on our investments. Sadly, we don't have as much of an investment as MIT, but we have, for the UK, quite a large endowment fund. So we have about, in dollar terms, maybe about $1.5 billion of investments. And part of our role is to advise what it means to be a responsible investor. And then finally, we do community relations as well and those kind of things. So a reasonably wide range of things. What we try to do in our chapter is just look back over the last 9 years and say, okay, as part of the system we are in, what have we learned? And the advantage of being asked to do the chapter for us is it forced us, the first versions of the chapter, I must say, were more like Dave's holiday slides. You know, oh, look, I kind of went here and I did this and then I did that. And I think, you know, under some challenge from Wendy and Janet, it made us think harder, hopefully, about, you know, being a bit more systematic. And we'll come back to this with the third space professionals idea. But so first of all, we tried to look at some of the frameworks that we operate under, you know, the SDG, Sustainable Development Goals, the idea of being an anchor institution that's large in scale, that's anchored in a geography that has something to offer, as was just being said by Julio. We try to think about public purpose frameworks. So for example, I'm a fan of the idea of an ecological university, Ronald Barnett. And he talks about ecological not only in the sense of nature, but he talks about various systems that a university is interlocked with: a cultural system, a research system, a teaching system, a social system. And the reason why he uses the term ecological is, first of all, a sense that some of these systems are under threat. They're fragile, they're not what they should be. And there's also an element of ought. We ought to do something about that. So it's not just that the systems are under threat, the ecological, the research, but we ought to do something about that as a university. So our chapter goes into some of that stuff. Some rather things that might sound pretty obvious, but again, we were just, you know, reflecting on the importance of context for all this that we're doing and trying to make change. You know, if you're going to change your organization or the city or the communities that you're based within, then you need to understand them, really. Otherwise, you really risk talking at cross purposes. The idea of systems leadership was one that we uncovered, and many people have talked about this already, but creating some sort of common vision, creating the context and the conditions for collaboration, searching out for new ideas and new ways of doing things and taking action, that kind of systems approach. Also the idea of an adaptive approach, of adaptive leadership, that and this doesn't come naturally to me, but, you know, a certain humility about how we're going about things, of listening, of being willing to change, of being resourceful, because there is no real kind of route map where you can just pick it up and read it out from the book and follow it. At least in my view, there isn't. So again, what we tried to do, we looked over various phases in terms of time phases. So we talked about phase one for us was just before we arrived and the first year, sort of 2010 to 2014. we were really just getting going and trying to figure out everything. Both of us were, myself and Michelle, we were both new to universities. And to some extent, we really didn't have much of a clue what we were doing. We thought we did, but looking back, we didn't. You know, we had to spend a lot of time understanding universities and our particular context. And from that, we call it phase two, the first couple of years, then maybe 2014 to 2016, we were building alliances, we were starting projects, we were testing things. The idea from Jim Collins of the flywheel, if you've come across that, of, you know, a flywheel is a big heavy object that's hard to get going. And when you first start to try and turn the flywheel, it's very difficult. But eventually you get to the stage of the flywheel is just spinning. And it's, you know, that's the idea anyway. And, you know, that's what we were trying to do early on, is get the flywheel moving and create some allies and some projects. And then we thought, for us, there was a third phase about raising our ambition further. The more projects we did, the more ambition we had. And so that probably lasted from about 2016 to 2020, where we were really just doing more and more and more. And the team grew in size and we took on more projects, and I demanded more of this and more of that. But latterly, and this is where, again, it was very helpful to be asked to write the chapter, we still don't think we're transforming yet, we're embedding enough yet. And so the phase we're entering now is that transforming and embedding agenda. How do we now reverse this? So instead of saying, it would be terribly nice if you would think about working with us on something like climate change before the planet, you know, atmosphere goes on fire, to turn it around saying, look, we have institution leadership and commitment from the highest levels here. It is your job to do some of the things on this list, and it's our job to help you. Now, how can we do that? And what tools and techniques do you need? What data do you need? What support do you need? And that's where we are just now. We also reached into some, it was a paper for some academic colleagues at Edinburgh from Ivory and Mackay. And what they had done is looked at sort of language and a terminology for what big corporates had been doing. And how do you embed big corporates, these issues into big corporates? And what was interesting for us is that the sort of journey that I've just described was very similar to what they were saying for big corporates. So what they were saying was there was a phase with big corporates called conforming, where you really just try to fit in. You come into the organization and you try and fit in with the organization's priorities. You try and create reputational wins. You try and save money. You try and do the sorts of things that corporations like in order so that you can build alliances. And the second phase, so that's the conforming phase. The second phase is leveraging, where you then try and case by case build up alliances and projects with people and infiltrate yourself in lots of places. So you're not as conforming as you were, you're now leveraging the social capital you've got internally. And the third phase is the kind of shaping, where you try and move at scale and pace. And what was interesting for us was we realized that the first couple of phases of our own journey were very much the conforming and a bit of the leveraging phase. And then latterly, we've been conforming and leveraging, and now we want to shape and move at scale. And so just to conclude, I think, because I'm almost at time, this thing about it being a marathon, not a sprint, I think is right. But I'm also concerned about, you know, this is 9 years. It's going to take everybody 9 years to do this. You know, I mean, we don't have that much time. So how do we do the sort of things we're talking about, but do it faster, and yet with the trust and with the alliances? Our chapter, just to make a plea for you, if you want to learn more, we tried to draw out some lessons. We put together 10 lessons, but just to pick out 3, reinforcing in leadership really matters. This is not going to happen by accident, certainly not in universities. Or if it is going to happen, it's certainly not going to happen at pace and scale without leadership. We're absolutely clear about that. Those universities that don't have local leadership on this stuff are not going to make the same sort of progress, we don't think. Second, this idea of adapted leadership, of understanding the system and the context, but being entrepreneurial. So there's a quote from the Royal Society of Arts, which is a UK-based body, which talks about think like a system, act like an entrepreneur. So think like a system, understand the organization you're within, but be entrepreneurial. Don't have a very inflexible map that says, well, we're not going to do that today because the map says we should be doing something else. You need to be innovative. And then finally, I guess one of our lessons was learning to live with ambiguity. I'd come from a highly structured government agency where we kind of all knew what we were doing. very organized, very structured. And we came into a university where we felt we had to live with ambiguity. It was part of the mission. So I hope that was useful anyway. I'm really grateful to be on this panel. Look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Dave. As always, very thoughtful. And I love the idea of kind of connecting the fragility and the sense of, getting on with the job. There's something about that. Unfortunately, David Nwogbo from Nigeria, technical difficulties, he won't be able to join us, but hopefully you will look forward with great gusto to learning from his chapter 2. But I'm going to segue, and that's just a hint of, that's just 3 of the chapters out of 24. So I think you get a sense of the kind of quality of thoughtfulness. And I just want to give an assurance, I think you've got that from all of the panel, but there's a real sense that people are sharing their journeys and their with a real generosity. This isn't a book that's bragging about things we've done. This is things where these are models that we've used, these are things that we've tried, these are things that we're still working on, and it's shared in that spirit of generosity as a community. And so I think that's really important. I think everyone recognizes that sense of humility that it takes to learn and to discover new ways of doing, and thinking about, here's some things that worked at this institution. Are there things I can take from what I've just heard from Princeton and MIT and UPM and Valencia and Edinburgh and the Open University in Nigeria? Can I take those things and can I, put together a context, mission relevant solution, or an opportunity to try something new in my university, my college? So that's kind of the approach that we've taken. So it isn't the book that's looking at, here's some trophies that this institution's won and aren't we clever? It's about, come share the struggle, look at what we're doing, and we're sharing it with the community in the way that I think really reflects what ISCN does too as a community. I want to kind of change gear a little bit, just as a segue into, had a little window into what the book might offer, that sense of transformation. But I think Julie touched on it, Shana touched on it, Julio, Dave too, all looking at new ways of kind of navigating the system, talking whether it's to politicians or to students, the skills that it needs to build the relationships and the capital that we need. And I was really struck looking across, a whole range of these different chapters about just how challenging it can be to talk about this subject, but to connect, I think, the kind of operational strategic agenda, the kind of professional services agenda with the academic and faculty-led agenda. And so this opportunity, I think, that this manifesto that we have for change, the sense of transformation that we're needing, and I think we've got a real sense of urgency here. Yes, it might be a marathon, but get on with it. This sense of sprint and exponential, I think has really come through. But we need new ways of operating, leadership and governance. And we've sort of got this idea, and if the term we're using for it at the moment is people who can span different silos within an institution, connect the dots inside and outside, so who can operate across an institution, who can communicate with different stakeholders, these kind of third way kind of professionals, third way people. So these are people that loosely we're describing that can traverse the academic and the professional domains. They're able to hold pan-institutional kind of change projects in the way that you described. And I think they're able to connect the academic mission with the sort of delivery agenda around, what sustainable development, sustainability needs. And I think you're hearing from a cohort here and in the book, people who are doing this, but actually recognizing it's quite a struggle. And so we thought it would be a really good opportunity to kind of have a conversation really about what is it that is distinguishing people who can do this, navigating these boundaries and bring together people around, as you said, Julio, put the problem in the middle and assemble a group of stakeholders, students, city officials, faculty, you know, people who are looking at major infrastructure investments. So what is it that they're doing? And can we get more of them? Can we upskill everybody to do that? What is it that those individuals are relying upon? And I'm beginning to see that green offices, sustainability offices, whatever the label that's applied, are really being relied on super heavily to affect the kind of strategic agenda of an institution, but are often not at the strategic influencing level, or there sometimes and other times not. And so we're kind of getting a bit of a mismatch, even though they are being sort of asked to do more and more because of the way this agenda is moving fast, and TikTok, 2030 is nearly here. So I thought this is a good opportunity just to have a few moments to share with this cohort their views, really, and to open up a dialogue through ISCN about, you know, what can take us forward. And so I'm going to invite folk to come in on this. I'm also going to remind you that the Q&A is open. So we're just going to give some quick thoughts here, and then we'll open up for discussion. So Dave, I'm going to come back to you. You just finished off there thinking about that, but I know this is something that we've been talking about, and recognizing that if we don't kind of understand this a bit more and do a bit more thinking about it, that we're going to run out of road as green offices go under with the strain. And you know, we battle with, as you say, moving from, what was it, leveraging to shaping. So let's talk about third way people and the people that we need to shape this agenda. So do you want to kick us off with some thoughts?
Thank you, Wendy. Will do. I'll probably go on too long, but I'm sure you'll shut me up. For me, there's a really basic level of what we've been doing. As soon as I arrived, it was obvious to me as a professional services person that why wouldn't I tap into academia? That brilliant, you know, expertise that Edinburgh has. We have the widest range of academic study in the UK, you know, in terms of breadth. So from the start, we were putting academics on working groups, we were consulting them, and then we began to realize, you know, there was a right way to involve them. There was something about timing. If we wanted quick answers, we didn't always want to go to academic friends. If we wanted something in depth, you know, that was great, but sometimes we didn't have time to go in depth. Sometimes we wanted them, but the drivers were different for them because they had other pressures of teaching or research or marking, whatever the thing was. And, you know, how could we get insights at the right time? And we also noticed that some, again, you know, just being honest, some academics will certainly understand the ideas, but not the how to in the same way when it comes to organizational change and making change. So from the very first, you know, months of being in the university, we're certainly trying to span the boundaries, and we've tried to do that. But as you know, because we've been talking about it, I do think there's a case to go further. And this idea of the third space, where you're trying to say, I want the right amount of rigor that academe brings, with the ability to move quickly, with the ability to know how to translate those ideas into practice. I mean, and the panel's been talking about that. We've been exploring, myself and Wendy, the idea of some sort of, in Edinburgh, Centre for Social and Sustainable Innovation and Leadership. And what we thought such a centre might do, first of all, it might help us grow leadership in this space. I wish I'd been told some of the things or shown some of the things that I've learned from 9 years at the university when I arrived. You know, so is there a case for some sort of capacity building, be it that centre or somewhere else in other universities, that tries to bring through that sustainable leadership and tries to teach about how to make change and what organizational change is and why it matters. I also think there's a dearth of research on what works within universities and what doesn't work, and what sort of systems or mechanisms or processes. And at the minute, too often it relies on busy sustainability directors to say, that was a great idea from Julia or Shana or Julia. Let's write that down on a piece of paper somewhere. And on the 12th of never, I'll get back to reading about it. You know, I think we need to find a better way of structuring learning on some of these things. I also think we don't have a great understanding of what the baseline is in terms of the models and the activities and so on of some of our leading universities and what they're doing. And then finally, just the final thought for me is, yeah, something about proactivity and scale. too often, at least in the UK, you know, if there's no research funding, there's no action sometimes unless there's a philanthropist. And we had the idea of what if universities were proactively, a bit like Julio was saying, I think, proactively spotting the social and environmental issues and then building collaborations to solve them, not waiting for government or someone to tell us this is now a problem that needs to be fixed. So so Wendy and I have been talking about this, but I think in a nutshell, there's a case for me to go further to extract lessons about what we've all been trying to do over the last decade and turn that into something that can be studied, that can be taught, that can be shared to hopefully accelerate the pace.
Thanks so much, Dave. And you just reminded me of, you know, Ronald Heifetz's work in the Kennedy School, who talks about adaptive leadership, but he makes this really, really strong kind of differentiation between technical problems and adaptive problems. And I feel that as a university sector, we've been looking at this agenda as a technical problem to fix, as opposed to an adaptive leadership challenge. And so I think that, you know, it's a really good setup to think about, you know, what is it that we need to get the scale and at the pace that we need to operate now. So thanks so much for that. Julie, take us on. What's your thinking about this space, this kind of third way kind of people, you know, not the best term, I know, but yeah.
No, I'm still grappling. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah,
I think so.
perfect.
Yeah. Dave, thanks. I was taking so many notes. I can't wait to follow up with you because I always enjoy how you're framing so much of what I'm experiencing regularly. Again, we could talk about this all day, so I'll just try to provide a couple of key points, but with the understanding that it warrants further, hopefully a follow-up and deeper discussion. I guess I want to say two things. I would say I built a third way office. So there's a third way people, and then it's now our ability in like this next gen way to build third way offices. So everything that's required out of my own platform for our office requires academic and operational engagement. And so as we prioritize, there's not one project, and I had to leap into that. And I have to say, back to Dave and I have talked about this, and many of us on this call, you know, I know what worries me, or many things keep me up at night, but one of them is the ability to accelerate the work that we're doing. Again, I know we're talking about a marathon, but how do you build these offices that are in response to what's needed in the world today? And so, you know, similar timing with Dave and others on the call. You know, can you continue to create half-lives of how long it takes to get done what we've all gotten done in the past 9 years? But anyway, one is the platform. So having third way people, but then having third way platforms. So everything in your office has academic and operational engagement, no matter what. And so that's a requirement I've built, just integrated into everything that we do. There's not one project I can name that doesn't have some kind of academic partner. It might not be a tenured faculty, but it might be a researcher or a postdoc. And then just a couple of points maybe to build on. Dave said so much, so I'm really just going to build on what he said, so I'm not repeating anything. One, I think, is the value proposition, you know, for this role. And again, I would concur with David's bridging, leveraging, scaling. So I just want to use that as the mindset here. And there's a real value proposition for being able to flow between academics and operations for the Institute when working on all of these issues. And I have found that's been recognized. And then the challenge is then you keep putting, you know, then in my role, but again, I think I'm speaking for others, then I keep getting paired as a co-chair of many committees that warrant faculty engagement. So I end up often frequently getting paired with a faculty member as a co-chair in order to build operations and academics. So I think it's really creating that as an understood value proposition. The other piece I think this third way person can do, because of this academic operational ability, is to do what I'm lately calling like future casting. So I have many stories where all of a sudden, you know, we started working on climate resiliency with a research group. We took an existing model, again, just to make a concrete example, you know, worked quickly early on with MIT researchers. We started to take a international model, apply it to Cambridge, build a climate resiliency model. And then all of a sudden more floods are happening. And then somebody turns around quickly and says, well, do we know what's happening with projected flooding at MIT? And we're able to turn around and say, yes, we've been working on this for 4 years. and we can quickly respond. So I do think this ability as third way people is to really be in touch with the research, understand what's happening globally, build those partnerships as Dave ensured, but really staying in touch with where are we looking at with climate change, what's coming out of the IPCC, what's the newest model on climate resiliency, what's the newest model on, on supply chain management, whatever that is. And then realizing, you're always about 10 years behind on the operational area within your campus because of the risk involved with accelerating that. So you already have that hand to kind of take operational ideas, and then figure out how to reduce the risk of applying that to campus. So I think that's, again, the role of a third way person. There's a lot of piece there. And again, I try not to repeat anything Dave said, but around risk, leveraging the academic partnerships and knowledge base to reduce risk on the campus front. It might be on, how we build net zero buildings. It may be on how we manage climate resiliency, but really at all times leveraging committees or projects, or research projects. I don't think there's one way one can do this. I think it can be through these various leverage points that we're all quite accustomed to across the board. And I think once you strengthen these academic operational partnerships, you can actually challenge the status quo of how things are taking place today in a way that people are open to. Two more pieces, and then I know my time is up. I've found myself more and more, particularly with heated issues around net zero, zero direct emissions, and the various pathways, is really making sure we're listening, giving faculty, playing a role. I have a committee of 25 faculty looking at net zero with me. And I purposely pulled together, I couldn't have done this in my first 2 years, but I'm now positioned, the values there, and to bring together the most diverse perspectives on how to get there in these very heated discussions. And then figuring out how to find common ground across these varying perspectives, from engineers to economists and everything in between, and then be able to go to the administration saying, I've listened to these 25 faculty and here's the common ground we found. And that seems to be really well received. And I think that's a defining feature of what you're calling a third way person, is that ability to, to provide, have the value and the, what's it called, the reputation to be able to even be a listener and stand for the Institute, and then bring that forth. Okay, I'll pass it on, but
that's great.
Thanks.
That's perfect. I love that. And I love the idea that we're actually listening to our own faculty as well in these spaces. Too often I see universities kind of ignore all this world-class expertise inside their institutions. And, it's fantastic. It's sort of building that alignment and consensus. So Sharma, do you want to just add your thoughts really about this space that we're kind of trying to grapple with, these kind of people and operations?
Yeah, thank you. I love everything that's been said so far. And one thing I'll add in this this role we play in bridging between academics and operations, I think that bridging function is something that is unique to our field. Well, it's not unique to our field, but it's a very, very important dimension of our field, because we all know that academic research happens on a very different schedule than operational realities, right? So having a buffer between the two worlds that can translate both ways, talking about these, third way people and third way, it requires a certain way of thinking that can nimbly switch from different systems and translate in between them in a way that both entities can understand each other. That's really, really important, because what happens most of the time, Wendy, to your point of, faculty being ignored on the operational side, there's a history there of everyone walking away because they just get frustrated because there's nobody playing that translational role that's so critical. It's just too time consuming otherwise, and disruptive. So I just wanted to make that point, I think that's a really important role of this kind of third way skill set. The other thing that I wanted to bring up is the role of storytelling. So what I'm finding with my communications partners is that there's a while they're phenomenal communicators, their lack of expertise in sustainability makes again, that translation activity really difficult. And so there's a tendency to greenwash without intending to. So what I'm finding is that there's a real need for capacity building in these sort of three-way thinkers that help to do the translation, the storytelling translation in communication, in partnership with really good communicators. And that seems to be such a keystone in the moment that we're in, because many of our campuses are sitting on gold mines of valuable stories that are valuable educationally, valuable to our industry partners, valuable to each other, valuable to decision makers, policymakers, and they're not getting out there effectively. So that's something I'm thinking a lot about right now that I think needs a lot of attention at this moment in history.
I love that. And it's interesting, in some of my sustainability stuff, I do stuff around how to speak, senior management speak, kind of that translator, how to take, and get what you want done by, by really not mentioning the S word or the green word. And so I think that translation, but also telling the stories. I mean, Dave and I and his team just did a session where we were talking about, reimagining that kind of future, but building it on the foundation of our stories, which have, built the trust and the currency that you've all described so ably. So just to conclude this part, Julio, all of that, that elaborate diagram that you showed, I mean, clearly you've got people who are operating across boundaries. So what's your thought here? And then we'll turn to the audience Q&A.
Yeah, thank you, Wendy, and thank you so much, Anna, Julie, and Dave, because they were amazing comments, reflection. I was taking notes of everything, and thank you so much. And as you were saying, Wendy, I think that's an adaptive problem, right? Because you are asking, how can we transform our society to be sustainable at the pace and scale we need? And of course, there is no simple answers, right? But I like this idea of the third way. We need maybe third way people and third way organizations, probably, right? And third way universities, right? In terms of people, I was thinking that we need people with generosity and building trust, because incentives are not aligned to work in a different way, right? And we need people who think systemically, as you were saying, with the system thinking on top of everything, right? So we need this kind of people. And I think to use our universities to transform our society or to foster this transformation towards sustainability, what I've realized after many years is that if we continue doing the same, it will be incremental and not transformative. So we need to transform our universities, which is really, really hard to make, right? And because, of course, they are centenary organizations that are used to be resilient and to survive through navigate through many different challenges, right? And they are used to maintain most of the characteristics, right? So I would say two ideas. One is this Kotter idea of creating a second operating system within the university, where you can showcase that it's possible to work in a different way, that you have the appropriate incentives, that people are really willing to work in a different way, they're willing to collaborate, and then spread this out throughout the university. I think that's one idea. And the second idea is, as I was saying before with the city, I've realized, I've been working for like 5 years on how to transform universities, and I've realized that it's almost impossible to transform from within the university. I think that's what you, Wendy, say sometimes is the power of with. Yeah. Only if universities work with other stakeholders to solve these adaptive problems is when they will transform. So it's the power of working with the city to transform the city, right? So aligning and connecting all the initiatives, teaching, researching, all the how do you call the non-curricular activities, cultural activities in the university towards facing, solving cities' problems. I think that's it. So the transdisciplinarity in both research, teaching, and all the work they are doing. So this idea of working with the city, I think it's, and with other stakeholders, but I mean, mainly with the city, I think that's another reflection.
Fantastic. I think that's just amazing. And that idea, I mean, the thing I love about this space is that we have, you know, I think a real sense of purpose. And so these things that we're talking about, and can we distill out is something that we can, you know, get that scale, that impact, and as you say, that power of width. The thing I don't like about Third Way is the idea I want this to be the way, the main way, and as opposed to some kind of discretionary. That's why I was railed against, you know, third mission. So that's the this is the way to be. So let's thank all of our panel, just to give them a bit of a breather now, but we're going to put them on the spot. I think for all of us, we've got some fantastic questions. We will commit, I think, to taking this dialogue that we've had and putting together a kind of blog posting around this Third Way, or the way people, to kind of keep the conversation going, because I think if we were at the ISCN in a wonderful place, as Julie was saying, you know, we'd carry on, you know, we'll be sitting in the bar or having a coffee now and talking about how do we wrestle with this. So we'll try and keep that conversation going. But I would like to turn to some of the great questions. And I think a couple of them are in this space. So Emilio and Teresa have asked a question really about navigating this space. And maybe I'll start with you, Julio, but navigating this space around kind of politicians and decision makers in government. And, you know, they have a different mandate. They have a kind of political mandate. But how do we get alignment with this kind of learning organization that's in discovery and exploring the university? And then cohorts, you know, and governmental officials and other politicians who have a public mandate to deliver against, you know, their agenda, their manifesto pledges or promises. So that's quite a tricky space for what we call a neutral convening space of a university. But clearly in a city, you are working with local politicians. So maybe you can just give us some insights, then I'll open it up. But thanks for those great questions, Emilio and Teresa.
Well, thank you. Amazing question. That's hard to answer, right? But just some thoughts. So first is what you were saying before, Wendy, putting the problem at the center is what helps politicians from different parties to agree a bit on what to do, right? Because if we are placing what citizens are facing, the problems they want to solve, that's a way to convene different stakeholders and different politicians from different parties to work on this. That's a first reflection. Second, with our work, from our experience working with cities, you need to work simultaneously at the political level with the councillors and the mayors, but also simultaneously at the technical level, because they will remain there. So it's the combination of a multi-level work. That's another way to maintain this and have impact in the long term. And the last reflection is, from our experience as well, if you are able to bring all the stakeholders and if they want to change, no mayor will say no, right? Because if the private sector is asking for that, if civil organizations are asking for that, if, you know, NGOs and academia, people living in the city are asking for that, they will do that.
I love that. Anybody else want to come in on this? Just that.
Wendy, can I share one piece? And excuse me, I'm going to just do this really fast. I think this might be of great interest because I keep seeing this. We actually have an explicit mandate, if you will, to work with governments as part of our climate action plan. And so we have there's, for those of you interested, take a look. It's called Fast Forward MIT, MIT's plan for the decade. I'm responsible for all the campus pieces, but it really mobilizes the entire community. And this question is at the forefront. So there's actually a I don't want to go as far as a mandate, but an explicit funded commitment, if you will, to inform governments and leverage power. And there's actually a whole working group. So I think that really was able to move from where we were when we first got started, which was more of dabbling on this, and some faculty, some to our government office. But anyway, it's explicit. It's part of what we do. It's assumed that we have to do it. And by mobilizing the whole campus, it's not assumed that I do it. I'm responsible for this, but there's accountability. That's a word that you use quite a bit for the MIT's commitment to the world and the campus, with accountability baked in. So I thought that model might be useful to folks.
Well, that's really good. And actually, we point very much to the fact that we have withstood centuries as universities, and so we work with politicians of every hue. We outlive, in many ways, the administrations come and go. So we have a broader kind of agenda there. So Dave, come in.
Yeah, just very quickly, based on my experience, I think three things have helped me down the years on that question. One is find a way to cast, if you can, the thing you want to do within the language of the politicians you're talking to. They'll come from different traditions, and it's not always possible, but quite frequently it is possible to recast what you're talking about in a language which is safer and resonates with their values, not just in their head, but in the heart. So think about that. Secondly, I think often politicians are looking to change, but they need something to refer to, a report, a piece of evidence from officials or from professionals or technical bodies. If you can provide some of that evidence, that gives them something. Third thing, though, is politicians speak the language of priorities, really. And so that means that if you're prioritizing something, something else isn't being prioritized, which it only stimulates vested interests who will want to stop the thing. And so one of the roles that universities can play, I think, is to help and make it easier. So you've taught the right language and you've given them the evidence to change, but now they don't want to change because there's vested interest and barriers. So if you can find ways to show this is going to work, and it's going to be cheaper than what people say, and everybody loves it, and it's going to have outcomes and impacts and so on, and overcome those barriers. And I think we're really well placed as universities to do that. So for me, you make it easy for the politicians to then take a decision. That's often been my experience, a way to get some change.
Yeah. It's also just making me think of, Shana's comment around translation. Here's another community to translate some of these messages, and it's that next level for our research often into policy, as well. But it does remind me again, and I say it often, about this convening power, the ability to bring people from, convene them around as we talk about this adaptive space, this put the problem in the middle. And the things that we're talking about in terms of the problems, the challenges, are some of the most exciting things that there are to work on. For our faculty show up because they're super interested, our students show up because they're really interested, politicians and city officials show up because they want solutions. So this is a good space that we're talking about. We've got some ongoing discussion around the third way people. So Melissa pointed to how do we get the right kind, not the ones who are just going to go around painting SDG kind of blocks on things, or greenwashing as called, but also maybe an opportunity to distill out here for with ISCN's kind of support, some kind of opportunity to do the kind of scaling that we see. So I don't know if you have experience that might be the things that we should not do in some ways in this space. I've seen just personally some opportunities where people in kind of operational come in and try and out-credential fairly junior faculty sometimes, and they get into sort of the battle of cleverness battles, which just never really works, as opposed to showing up with on both sides with the humility to sort of learn and move on and move forward. But so I've seen some things not to do, but I don't know if you have some advice about things not to do. So Dave, yeah, kick us off.
Probably lots of not to do's, but just to go back to the to do's bit, we say our department's got 3 core competencies, and that helps me select the right people. So the first one is, there shouldn't be anybody else in the universe who understands how these issues apply better to the university than our department, because if they do, what the hell are we doing? And it goes to your point, Wendy, about we're not the climate experts for the university. There are people who know far more about climate science and climate physics than we do. But there shouldn't be people out there who understand better how climate change as an issue applies to the university than us. So that's our first core competency, understanding how these issues apply to the university. So I used to say to my staff when they send me a very long report, don't send me a very long report, send me a report about how that issue applies to the university. Now I'm interested. So the second core competency, though, implied by the first, if you're going to say how this applies to an organization, you need to understand the organization. So we need to be well connected. So our second core competency is around that, knowing how to connect externally and internally, and being the people who know people who know people. And the third one I always look for is how to make change. And if I can get those three things, because this is a values-led agenda where people come anyway, regardless of the pay almost in a way, we don't have trouble getting the technical bits. So, I'm never looking for one club golfers who just know how to do climate science, because that's not what we need. We need those other things. So that, anyway, that's what we try for in our world.
Love it. Any other comments or final comments about what to do or what not to do to avoid the greenwashing? Yeah, Sharma.
Just one thing that's on my mind most recently as a not to do, and it goes back to what I was talking about before in communications and storytelling. Our students are understandably and reasonably skeptical of everything we do. It's their frame of mind right now. On the other hand, they're desperately wanting to be involved and to take action that's meaningful. So if we are doing storytelling and engaging them and only telling them the good stuff, number one, they don't know where to act. They don't believe us. They actually want to know where the gritty problems are. They want that honesty. And so I'm really aware of that right now, of not feeding into their skepticism by being too glossy.
Yeah.
But actually talking about this like problem solving in action. We haven't figured all of it out, but we've figured some of it out, and here's where you can plug in given your spheres of influence at this moment in your life. So
I love that. I have a slide in my deck when I look at sustainability leadership, which is truth, trust, transparency. These are the ingredients, and it's just really important. Julie, and then we'll take a final quick fire round. So Julie.
Yeah, just one quick comment just that you prompted, your comments prompted for me. A couple of years ago, we did this large community input session over a couple of months for some strategic planning. And what came out of that, I carry every day, which is really this third way person needing to, there's two cultures I navigate at MIT, and I'm sure all of you can relate, is there's the tell me what to do culture. Don't tell me what to do, but tell me where we're going. What's the commitment? What's the vision? But don't tell me what to do. You can guess what part of the institute that is. And then you have to learn how to navigate in that so you're heading in the right direction. And then there's this large also, don't tell me what to do, but tell me where we're going. And then there's the please tell me what to do culture. And then I'll tell you how we're going to get there. Again, you can phrase it how you want, but this third way person has to navigate two very different cultures. So on net zero, we're going to tell you where to go. You're going to have some people are like, just bring, don't tell me what to do, but invite me in. And then the others saying, tell me exactly what to do. What building should I build? What pavement should I use? And we have to navigate that with great, with grace, if you will, and open-mindedness. So that would be the piece I would add. And so in line in that are lots of to-dos and not what not to do. But if you can frame that and recognize that with great humor and humility, I think you can go a long way.
Perfect. That's perfect. So telling, a little bit of telling, a little bit of showing, a little bit of nudging, a little bit of aligning, this dance that we're talking about. So we have, we're at time, but I think we have a great question here from Zimi, who's asking, can we share some lessons learned over the last decade and what we can do faster? Each chapter in the book finishes with 3 key insights, lessons that we can move forward. So I would encourage you to have a look at that. And also that manifesto that I touched on at the beginning does distill that out. So we're at time. I want to give very, you know, just in all humility, genuinely, it's a pleasure to get together with everyone. Thank you so much for the work you did on your chapters, right in the midst of COVID, right with all the other things that you were battling. There was such generosity from this community of 24 chapters, 65 authors. So gracious for you to show up today. Thank you so much for the engagement from the audience, and thank you to Jen Crothers for all your support with the session and to the ISCN. Looking forward to the great rest of the week. Thanks so much. Thanks everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.